When I spoke to you last, you said you expected one or perhaps two members to join, but instead we saw six. Well, what does that mean?
The fact that they chose Iran, again, that was not something I expected on the first round. I was expecting Iran later on because Iran is such a contentious choice with the US and Europe that now has to confront an organization that has three of its most outspoken foes, Russia, China, and Iran in it. The other thing that was surprising was to see how Brazil, South Africa, and India really made a conscious decision to go against US and European interests and policies here, particularly with the vote on Iran.
So do you see this as a sort of setback for the US?
No doubt this is a setback for the US and for Europe too. I mean, there is absolutely no way to couch this, that in many ways this was a giant middle finger from this group to the US and Europe. And on top of it, they chose Russia as next year's venue for the summit. So in many ways, you're seeing the diminished influence of G7 countries and how decades and decades of neglect and duplicity and hypocrisy in many respects on the part of global North countries in their policies towards the global South are now, really causing great harm to their long-term interests. And I think this demonstrates that India's interests are not always aligned with the US. What we've seen with Modi and the decision on Iran and the BRICS and the talks with Xi, India is doing what India has always done, which is pursuing its own interests and its own national security concerns.
You mentioned the US and India being kind of key partners in the Indo-Pacific. Obviously, one of the key cornerstones of that relationship is the Quad security framework with the US, India, Japan, and Australia. Has that been weakened now? And, given that Taiwan plays such a sort of pivotal role in the thinking about security in the Indo-Pacific, is Taiwan's position more compromised now?
I think it's too early to say that the Quad has been weakened by this. And I think it's also, let's not overstate that any rapprochement between India and China is only going to be done in very small, intermittent, steps. But again, in terms of if I was waking up in Taipei and I'm waking up in Washington today to see the new configuration of the BRICS, it's a different world than it was on Thursday. And so if they don't take lessons away from what happened this week, then this is only going to accelerate in terms of the mobilization of global South countries aligned against US, G7, and even to some extent Taiwan interests.